Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. This is Ukraine War Frontline update for the 8th of July 2023. Before we go to the frontline, let's have a look a little bit at what the ISW Institute for the Study of War American military think tank says in their preamble before they do their daily report sections. They say that Ukrainian forces made tactically significant gains in Bakhmut area and continued counteroffensive operations in at least three other sectors of the front on July the 7th. Right. The front line's a little bit confusing. There seems to be quite a bit of counter-attacking by the Russians, and the Russians appear to have made some gains in certain areas. And also, there's some conflicting accounts of gains that Russians and Ukrainians have made gains in the same place, type thing. So it's all a little bit foggy. Just trying to work that out. Or as ever, we do need to wait for the dust to settle off in these places, but perhaps as an indication or confirmation that the Ukrainians seem to be under pressure in certain areas from the Russians, Russian forces have reportedly committed almost the entirety of the Russian eastern group of forces to southern Ukraine. And as well, the deployment is almost the entirety of the Russian eastern grouping of forces and extensive southern military district elements to the front line in southern Ukraine suggest the Russian defenses in southern Ukraine may be brittle. So where we might see Ukraine finding it quite difficult to break through certain lines, most of the front line, I guess, and then pulling back to do a lot more attritional long range attacks, then that can be understood in light of the claim that the Russians are absolutely piling forces into particularly the southern regions of the map. So if we look at the war map here, this whole area, this southern Zaporizhia Oblast area and the southern Donetsk area there, the Russians are fixing number of troops, and that can be seen as one of the objectives for the Ukrainians. And sending a whole load of reinforcements there. And that shows that could indicate that if they were eventually broken through, the attrition, the ranged attritional warfare that the Ukrainians are engaging at the moment is successful, then perhaps there's no one left at home behind those lines. I don't know. We shall see. Certainly, I think things have slowed down on the front line. And that's what Andrew Perpetua, the pro-Ukrainian mapper that I rely on, indicated by the blue line here. That's his Russian defensive lines. The red line is the pro-Russian mapper Syriac maps Russian defensive lines as well, and you can compare the two there. I've heard nothing in this Kupiansk area, but if we come down to Novoselivska and Kuzmivka, which is just to the northwest, of Svatova, we see that there are gains for the Russians here. There are Russian gains to the north of Kuzmivka. You can see it's slightly lighter red here. That's the gains shown on Andrew Perpetua's map. So Andrew Perpetua has gains here for the Russians, and Syriac maps has gains here for the Russians. Very marginal gains, but actually possibly quite significant, pushing across the road, across the railway track and across the road into the first street or two, certainly the first row of houses here of Novoselivska. So this is also agreed. Andrew Perpetua says that this is happening too, but he already had his lines somewhat nearer to that. He's leaving that as grey zone, but he says, yeah, the Russians are attacking into Novoselivska. So some gains for the Russians both in the settlements there, but also to the north. Whether this was always under control of the Russians, I don't know. Sometimes you get movements, you think, wow, that's a significant gain for the Russians. I haven't heard much about that, but it's just basically confirmation of shelling and activity that means mappers go, oh, they're not there, they're here. So that might not be an actual Russian offensive, but just rejigging the map, even though it looks like quite a large area. But you've got to understand that, keeping an eye on the whole front line and exactly who is where over 1,300 kilometers is a pretty time-consuming and difficult job. So it could be that's rejigging, but this is certainly a Russian attack, and that's been confirmed there. So the ISW goes on to talk in terms of the different regions and their daily update. That yes, there is activity there. I mean, a lot of the usual places: Novoselivska, Stelmakivka, again, Karmazinivka there, unsuccessful ground attacks from the Russians in those three areas, and northwest of Brestova. So these are all sort of in muchness in this kind of area. If we come in, zoom in a little bit, I'm sure we come down to Karmazinivka. Yep, there it is there. And then Stelmakivka, which is back up there. So Stelmakivka, Novoselivska, there's Brestova as well. So in this kind of area, and then as we come further down to the forest, there's still activity in the forest and in the Dubrova area as well. So as we come down here, we hear the Dubrova, Bilohorivka, Shiplivka. This is Milbolga claim that Ukrainian forces attacking the Russians in these areas, Nevska, Yampilivka, Mikivka, Torska. So actually, as we get further down to this area, it looks like the Ukrainians are mounting more attacks here, whereas the Russians have a bit of gains to be seen further to the north. So that is fairly active along that front line at the moment. Suryak Maps has that reflected in this update tweet they have. The Russian army retook the first street of Novoselivska while troops were trying to enter into the town from the southern axis. So the Ukrainians are holding on at the moment, but they could be under quite a bit of pressure in that area. Okay, so that's pretty much the Kupiansk-Kreminna front line. We'll come down now past Seversk to the Bakhmut area, and you can see there's a number of pins here on my map. As we come to the Bakhmut area, remember that there is another line to add, which is the pro-Ukrainian map, a deep state map, but the yellow line there representing the Russian defensive lines doesn't change as quickly as the other mappers. They are under a 2 to 3 day operational security adherence. But yeah, so Bakhmut, well, there's quite a bit going on in Bakhmut, as you can well imagine. Syrsky, the Ukrainian commander, stated that Ukrainian forces are making progress and have retaken unspecified territory in the Bakhmut direction. The general staff have said that Ukrainians conducted offensive operations north and south and repelled Russian attacks near Bakhivka. So Bakhivka is this area there. And indeed, Suryak Maps has some Russian gains in Bakhivka. We have seen it go sort of backwards and forwards here. That shows, there's a bit of a difference here between Suryak Maps and Andrew Perpetua. Andrew Perpetua, on the other hand, in his live stream last night, said that the Ukrainians gain every day in the Bakhivka area, but they just gain very small amounts, literally like 20 meters of field of a tree line, or so on and so forth. But he says that they consistently are gaining in this area. It just might not look like significant changes on a map. Whereas on the other hand, the Suryak map saying a counterattack for the Russians indicates some gains in that area. Indeed, Suryak maps here. Where are you? Yeah, it shows that up there. And then some gains around Klishchivka as well. We'll talk about this in a second. It's just confusing, contradictory claims. So, Bakhmut front, Russian army launched counterattacks in Klishchivka and Bakhivka and managed to recapture the recent lost territory and stabilize the front. So that is the claim there. Go back to the Institute for the Study of War. A Russian blogger claimed that Ukrainian forces conducted unsuccessful offensive operations with company forces up to a company in size and armored vehicles south of Ozaryanivka. This is something that is relatively new. Ozaryanivka is to the south here. Just in that area. So the Ukrainians advancing there. In that area, interestingly, Suryak Maps has some gains for the Russians here. I don't know if that's rejigging, because actually it's in line with what a deep state map has. So I put a question mark on there. I didn't today, but I should have done. I don't think that is a gain for the Russians. As you can see, it's pretty much reflected by something that's deep state maps had for the best part of the week there. So at least I think deep state map did show a little bit of an increase for the Russians there. So I think that was a gain by the Russians, just not in the last 24 hours. I think that Suryak Map's catching up there. But Ozaryanivka, the Ukrainians could be advancing, trying to attack there. We have the canal here, but there is, like you see in Kupiansk-Kreminna, just to the north of here, there's an area where you can cross the canal as it kind of goes in a tunnel. It could be that they're attacking there, but then that's a kind of pinch point that makes it quite easy to defend. That's the same up in Kupiansk-Kreminna, where you have this tunnel there, where or two tunnels where the canal goes through. But anyway, let's just go back to what the ISW says. Continue there. Russian Ministry of Defense claimed that elements of the Russian southern group of forces repelled Ukrainian attacks near Yahidny, that's to the north, Mayorsk further to the south, and Klishchivka to the southwest of Bakhmut. Russian and Ukrainian sources continue to disagree over the status of the heights surrounding Klishchivka, and this might talk a little bit to how I happen to have almost contradictory pins here. Well, I do. They are contradictory. So, on the one hand, Andrew Perpetua's map has the Russians being pushed back past these tree lines that have been pretty much shredded, and activity taking place right on the edge of Klishchivka. That's the Ukrainians controlling this trench network on the northern heights here. And on the other hand, Syriac maps, the pro-Russian mapper, has the Russians regaining that. And there is the contradiction there, because you can't have them both gaining unless they really did swap territory several times in a day, and significant portions of that territory. The Syriac maps also has gains over here. I mean, you can see this is significant difference between the mappers here, and I don't know what the truth is, but this would take quite a long time to take, because you've got forests here and you've got fields here, and if the Russians have regained this territory all in a day, that is really, really significant. I don't know that could happen that easily, but something is going on there. So anyway, as the ISW continues, Ukrainian General Staff spokesperson Kovalev reported that Ukrainian forces continue offensive operations north and south of Bakhmut and achieve partial success near Klishchivka. Some Russian mail bloggers claim that Ukrainian forces control important heights west and north of Klishchivka, while other mail bloggers disagreed and claimed that Ukrainian forces do not control the dominant heights of the area. And therein lies your understanding of that map, is that different people will disagree on what's going on there. Now, I was reported yesterday that there's fighting on the outskirts of Klishchivka, the entrance to Klishchivka. I don't know whether that's still taking place. I don't know whether the Russians have pushed back the Ukrainians. Of course, if the Russians are piling in reserves to do this pushing back, on the one hand, that's bad news for Ukraine because they're losing territory or they're finding it really difficult. But on the other hand, they are piling in reserves. And then if one of the objectives is to fix troops into this area and to attract Russian troops, that can lead to, oddly, it might sound odd, but that can lead to being some form of success for the Ukrainians, because it means that those troops are then not positioned elsewhere. And this is kind of what the ISW is going with in terms of what's taking place in the south, which is fixing a whole load of troops there, and maybe not having them further back in the defenses or elsewhere along the front line. Syriac maps also has some marginal gains for the Ukrainians here, and I don't know if that is just slightly more accurate mapping from our part in this area, or that maybe I didn't see that it was here, the line was slightly incorrect previously on my part, or whether actually Syriac maps has changed their mapping there. It's really, you can't on Syriac maps go back and compare previous days, unfortunately, but it could be that the Ukrainians have gained marginally along here, this kind of strip along here. We know that they have made some gains there. Syriac maps did have gains for the Ukrainians in that area previously, so it could just be rejigging there. But I guess it's going to be tough north and south of Bakhmut. And we go to look at some of the other sources. Here are the gains that the Ukrainians have made over the last I guess few weeks or so. This is War Mapper's interpretation, comparison over the last week, sorry, not few weeks, that's 1 week. So the Ukrainians are making net gains there, although it might be a case of 2 steps forward, 1 step back occasionally, or that is just not an accurate representation of what has happened. Not sure yet. Deputy Defense Minister Hanna Malia has said that Ukrainian troops have advanced up to 1 kilometer in some areas south of Bakhmut. So that would be, you would assume, in the areas that we're talking about here, in the Klishchivka area. That's where most of the activity is taking place. It could be towards Kherson and this area where the Ukrainians took some land to the east of the canal, coming towards Kherson. but suitably vague. While the front line and the sector's northern flank did not see changes, we have Russian troops are actually trapped in Bakhmut, according to Hannah Malier. Our troops have made it as difficult as possible for the enemy to move and made it impossible for him to leave. Shelling continues from both sides. So that's Bakhmut city itself. In the Bakhmut direction, on the southern flank, there is advancement in several sections, more than a kilometer. The report says. So, as per Britain's intelligence report, Ukrainian forces made significant gains in the Bakhmut direction. Russian soldiers are highly likely struggling with poor morale, a mix of disparate units, and limited ability to find and strike Ukrainian artillery. Although that's probably not like a 24-hour synopsis. That would be a generalized synopsis about what's going on in Bakhmut, I would claim. And then from the Bakhmut front, there isn't a huge amount of footage coming out over the last 24 hours, although it's just starting to filter through now. So there is quite a bit of footage coming out as I'm speaking. And this is just one bit I found in the last hour. Near Kupiansk-Kreminna, units of the 28th Mechanized Brigade stormed enemy trenches and knocked the Russians out. So let's go and geolocate this. I haven't done this myself yet, so I'm excited to see, or interested to see, excited is probably the wrong word, interested to see where that is. So, interesting. Okay, this is actually quite significant. So that would be an indication that the Ukrainians are pushing the Russians out. I don't want to watch that because it's going to have something inappropriate, and I seem to get demonetized quite a lot at the moment on videos and age restrictions. But the question is, from which direction are they attacking? And I guess we'll find out sooner or later. But that is significant if that's on the eastern side of the canal, and it could be a case of, as I was talking, this area that the Ukrainians have made gains in yesterday, quite a large area of gains. It could be they're attacking from the north and pushing down the canal, as I was indicating yesterday, as a way to attack Kupiansk, not only across this pinch point where it's quite easy to defend, I would assume, but also from the north on a larger front here. So if they could take, all of these fields, then that would give them a better chance of successfully attempting to encircle Kupiansk, or at least flank it from two sides. So that could be some significant footage. Important that Ukrainians are clearing out trenches behind or on the Russian front lines there. Right, and then finally, I think, yes, finally, just to let you know, this is Andrew Perpetua's map, his own map that I draw the red line from, well, actually my blue line, but the edge of his red area, which is the Russian defensive line. Now, as you can see, Russians are attacking near Berestova, Ukrainians are attacking near Rozdilivka, Ukrainians are attacking along the N03 highway into the north of Bakhmut. Russians are attacking, Ukrainians and Russians are attacking around Bakhivka. You've got a couple of Russian attacks going on there. You've got Russians attacking, Ukrainians attacking. So the point is that this is fairly chaotic, and the Russians are putting up a lot of resistance by, defending by attacking. Best form of defense is offense type thing. So, as I keep saying, and that seems to be what is going on in Bakhmut. It is, I imagine, pretty intense, but that might, at the end of the day, play into Ukrainian hands. Although it's going to be tough and attritional, the idea is that is one of the objectives of attacking around here. The question is then, well, are they taking advantage of weaknesses elsewhere, given that the Russians have piled in forces to the Bakhmut area? Right, let's go out of Bakhmut now, and we'll go into Adiivka area. So let's just get rid of that so my computer can have a bit of a breathing room. Right, so we're going to come out of Bakhmut, come down to Adiivka, and not a lot of news really coming out of Adiivka. Yes, there are mentions of all the normal places. Russian forces conducting unsuccessful offensive operations near Novokalinove, that's to the north, Adiivka, Nevelska, that's to the south, Pervomaisky to the south of Marinka, much further to the south, and Novomykolivka for the south of Marinka. So the Russians are attacking quite a lot. The Ukrainian spokesperson stated that Russian forces continue to focus their efforts on offensive operations in the Adiivka and Marinka area. So the Russians are attacking all around here, to the north, Novokalinove, which is up here, there. And then there's talk about Nevelska, which is down here, an important outpost there that stops the Russians from encircling at Pervomaisky. There's activity around Pervomaisky, and then Marinka further down here, and Novomyrkylivka south of there. So there's a lot of activity, I think, around this area between Marinka and Novomyrkylivka. Right. What other sources do I have on Avdiivka? Not a great deal. Evil Gherkin says, near Avdiivka, our troops continue the meat assaults. It seems that the headquarters of the First Army Corps are in a hurry to destroy the maximum number of our fighters as uselessly as possible in order to quickly lose the war. So whilst the ISW is saying yes, the Ukrainian spokesperson is saying yes, the Russians are attacking and focusing their attacks in these areas that I've just mentioned. Igor Gherkin, who's an ultra nationalist, is saying we're just uselessly sending our troops to die in kind of meat grinders. And he's highly critical of that approach. So on the one hand, you might go, oh, the Ukrainians are under a lot of pressure. But on the other hand, they are possibly attriting Russian troops at a ratio that is not advantageous for the Russian forces. And then there is here some footage, again, another one that's just come out. Soldiers of the 59th Brigade storm Russian trenches near Marinka in Donetsk, another returned position a few more 100 meters of liberated Ukrainian lands. Now, unfortunately, at the moment, let's refresh that, see if, because normally Paul Jowan himself does geolocation, see if that's been geolocated. No. So, you know, this is another example of areas being taken. I won't show it to you in sort of slow motion there because it will be inappropriate in places, but you get the idea that around Marinka, that it could be that the Ukrainians are retaking some ground, but that's yet to be geolocated from the sources I've seen that video. I've only seen that video on 2 different sources though, but it is one of these that's filtering through. Right, so let's now go to the Donetsk front line. So this is bypassing Vuhledar, coming out past Marinka to Velika Novosilka. And there's not a lot of information coming out from here. I mean, it really, and this is kind of repeated across all the front lines. So it's either a quiet day or the Ukrainians are taking an operational pause. Andrew Perpetua talking about this in his live stream. He said that it has slowed down on the front line. He monitors the activity very closely. And he's saying it is slowing down, but it could be an operational pause or sitting back to let the attritional phase work itself out, which is using HIMARS, using artillery, using drones to absolutely hammer the Russians, rather than using human beings to do that. If you're going to trick the Russians by sending in Ukrainians, then you will lose in one of your objectives, which is not to lose many of your own personnel. So that's one of your objectives, to not lose your own troops, which it will be, and equipment. Then actually throwing your troops and equipment into grinding attritional maneuvers is not the best thing to do. And we have seen, when you do that. So here is Ukrainian equipment getting hammered here, and I think this is not the same one as the one we've seen a million times. This is coming from near Novodorivka, where 2 tanks, 5 MRAPs, so mine-resistant ambush protection vehicles, were taken out by Russian forces, and it's not a good look. However, that is in this area near Novodorivka. So this Barracuda source says 8th of July, but it's probably old, destroyed Ukrainian column there. That is to say it's up here. Now, this is much further back from the front line. However, it is close to where Suret Maps has a front line. Most other people seem to accept that the Ukrainians are knocking on Pryutny's door. There were claims that Pryutny was taken. I don't know if that's true, although this could be, or at least it's contested. So I don't think that video footage will be from the last 20. Well, unless there are, I mean, at the end of the day, you can hit that quite easily with artillery. So you might have columns of vehicles back here. They don't have to be hit next to the front line. I mean, that's well within artillery range, isn't it? So that's 11 kilometers from where you're going to be seeing artillery and mortars and whatnot. So, well, mortars would be somewhat closer than that, but you get the point. So that footage could be recent, but Barracuda says it's probably old. But then you wonder if that footage was old, why have we not seen it? Because the Russians shout about stuff like that. So I don't know. Anyway, there is footage of stuff getting damaged there. We're just not hearing much about any particular gains here, nothing too granular. If we come down to the ISW, they talk about Russian forces attacked and recaptured several positions northwest of Staromayorsk, according to the Russian mill bloggers, that is. Russian sources additionally claim that Ukrainian forces conducted ground attacks south and southwest of Velika Novosilka near Staromayorsk and Uruzhaina, Novodonetsk, and Pryutny. So the Ukrainians are attacking all around here, but one Russian mill blogger saying that the Russians counterattacked near Staromayorsk and took some ground, but I don't have any confirmation of that from any other sources. Soldiers complaining about. So here we have. So let's read this actually. A group of mobilized Russian fighters from Altai Krai, Republic of Sakha and Primorsky Krai, posted a video which I showed you, claiming that Russian military command abandoned them on a front line in the face of Ukrainian counterattacks in Novodorivka, and that their unit has lost 66 men in this area. So I think it was 50% of their troops. Since January 2023, the soldiers complained about a lack of artillery support, provisions, and water, indicated that some Russian forces fighting in Western Donetsk are likely facing high levels of exhaustion and attrition in the face of continued Ukrainian counterattacks. So, when you go back to look at this from a larger sort of perspective, right? Yes, the Russians are making it really difficult for the Ukrainians to make gains. The Ukrainians have not committed their main forces, and the Russians are sending out complaint videos. They're saying they're losing troops. They don't have high morale. They've got low morale, and they don't have water and food, and they're not getting enough artillery support, so on and so forth. So, is that just an anomaly, or is that a trend? Is that something that's representative? Quite possibly, and the Russians, I think, are throwing everything, including the kitchen sink, at this front line. And I think, yes, that will make it very difficult for the Ukrainians to advance quickly, but it is kind of a good sign going forward, potentially. Am I trying to see things too positively? Maybe. But, I think if you understand what the objectives are, then some of the is not as slow or as bad as one might think. It is going to be hurting the Russians more than it's hurting the Ukrainians, even if it is hurting the Ukrainians somewhat. And in fact, if we come west of here, so again, not too much detail coming out there, not a lot of detail coming out from around Robotyne. Really, over the last 24, 48 hours, seems to have quietened down because they were on the edge of Robotyne, and I presume they still are. It's just, not a lot of information. There is a claim about, I think it's trench line over near Zerebianki, somewhere around here, where, and I talked about this morning in the news piece, where there was a trench that the Ukrainians took. Well, the Russians abandoned it, so the Ukrainians pretty much ran in. You can see them running in there to take the trench. I'm going to stop the video there. They basically charge into the trench, and the trench blows up. It was booby-trapped all along here, and the Ukrainians lost a good third of their platoon there, and that renders them combat ineffective. Just really difficult to take ground quickly, and then extrapolate that across the front line. Every trench that the Russians either concede or the Ukrainians take, it then needs to be very carefully, consolidated, and you need to make sure there are no booby traps, and then you need to mine the area. Everything will be slow, and when you do it quickly, like that one, which is quickly, they've abandoned it, rush into the trench, you get blown up. So you can't do things quickly. You have to do things slowly, and that's a real sad loss of life for the Ukrainians. But it goes to show that nothing will be quick in this counteroffensive in that area. Just coming out recently, Tokmak, which is in this general area of south of Orikhiv. Tokmak is being hit at the moment. 4 explosions have been heard there. I didn't report that in my news piece because it hadn't happened yet. That's literally just happening now. But yeah, you can see that things are slow and attritional. Russian sources claim that Ukrainian forces launched a renewed wave of counterattacks in western Zaporizhia. Several Russian mill bloggers claim that small Ukrainian infantry groups conducted a series of assaults along the western Zaporizhia Oblast front line. But I'm not seeing that reflected on the maps yet. but it could well be. Something I forgot to say yesterday, I did have it highlighted, is that as we come out of the Zaporizhia front line, so sorry that there's not too much mapping changes going on there, although there could well be changes in territorial control, just not represented in the maps yet. The Russians are taking up positions that they had lost due to the flooding and manning those positions. That's something the ISW reported on yesterday. I just forgot to tell you. But anyway, that's taking place there. There's not a lot to report about Kherson. I've got some footage here. I'm not going to play all of it. This is some music that's unnecessary. This is a boat that is being chased by a first-person view drone. And the drone hits it and blows up the boat. So it just goes to show that even crossing the river or moving from place to place on the river here is dangerous. So the Ukrainians lost a boat there and some troops in that boat. So inappropriate footage, but yeah, things are difficult for sure. Yes, so as far as what is taking place there, Ukrainian administration stated that Russian forces conducted 77 strikes across the bank. And Humaniuk said that Russian forces additionally targeted the West Bank with S-300 surface-to-air missiles used in a ground mode, somewhat more inaccurate, and the use of Shahed drones in the area. Russian mill bloggers claim that the situation on the east bank of Kherson Oblast near the Antonivsky Bridge remains unchanged, and reported that Ukrainian and Russian forces are conducting mutual artillery shelling of positions in the opposite bank. This is because it's actually really difficult to move around here. So essentially, you've only got this road to move down, and if you've got that under fire control, well, basically you can't really move very easily. So yes, the Ukrainians might have control of this whole area here, as Andrew Perpetua states on his map. Is disagreed with, as you can see by Suriyat maps here, but Andrew Perpetua has the Ukrainians solidly controlling this whole area, all of the settlements that you can see here and the smaller roads. But once you get out of that, you've got arguably, especially after the flood, boggy marshland and rivulets, and no ability to move certainly mechanized equipment through here with any ease. So basically you're stuck with only being able to come down here. And if you've got fire control over that road, which the Russians will have, then the question is, well, what are the Ukrainians going to do now? How are they going to bust out of where they are to hit Oleshki? Is that practically just too difficult? While the Russians can use FOB 500 bombs and their artillery and mortars to hammer Ukrainians if they try to do that. Anyway, that's the Frontline update for today. Please like, subscribe, and share. I will try and get out my extra later, but it might be a little bit later than normally is, and it will be slightly different. I'm dipping into a book that a friend got me to share some stuff with you from that book that's pertinent to. It's called The Bomber Mafia by Malcolm Gladwell. It's pertinent to the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Anyway, take care, and I'll speak to you soon.